Hello and welcome to this week's edition of What's in the Night Sky. This week I'm going to discuss the moon at first quarter, the Beehive Cluster, shadows on Jupiter and the constellation of Cygnus, the Swan. Let's begin with the planets. You'll see I'm set to Monday the 22nd of June at around 11 o'clock, and if we move on to around midnight you'll see that Jupiter and Saturn are just rising around midnight, and Mars is following behind at around 1:30. And Mars at the moment is not in the best position for observing still, because it's still quite low to the horizon and doesn't get particularly high, but as the weeks go on Mars is getting in a more and more favourable position for observing, and that's because Mars is approaching what we call opposition, which is when it appears on the opposite side of the sky to the Sun and is closer to the Earth. So the best time to observe Mars will be when it reaches opposition, and that's going to happen in October. So between now and October, Mars will appear to get higher, brighter and larger as the months go on. So now's the time to start looking at Mars really, and to see if you can notice that brightening happening, and see if you can notice it appearing larger in the night sky. And moving on, I just want to go back to Jupiter and take us to Thursday, the 25th, and on Thursday the 25th at around 11:30 if you have a small telescope, well, a modest sized telescope really, something above about 70mm, with a magnification of around 100 times or more, you might be able to spot the Galilean moon Ganymede casting its shadow on the surface of Jupiter. And I'm going to speed up time a bit and we'll see if we can see that happening. So this is Thursday night at around 11:30. It will start around 11:35, I think. There we go. So you can see the shadow of Ganymede on the Jupiter's disk. And if I keep time going, you'll see how that appears to track across the disk of Jupiter, and the shadow will disappear just before 3 AM. So you've got from 11:35 until around 3 AM, so lots of time there to have a go at observing Ganymede's shadow on Jupiter. Let's take a look at the moon now. We'll go back to Monday and have a look in the early evening and see if we can spot the moon. Here we are. And you'll see that on Monday the moon is just past new, so it's a very thin crescent and it appears very close to the Sun, so it's going to be washed out in the Sun's glare and you're going to struggle to spot it on Monday. If we go forward to Tuesday, and I'm just going to take us to around 10:30, just after sunset, and you'll see that the thin crescent moon is in the constellation of Cancer. If we zoom in a bit, you might be able to see that there is a star cluster coming into view, and this is the Beehive Cluster, and it appears close enough to the moon on Tuesday that you might be able to get both objects in the same field of view of a pair of binoculars. And if we just pop a binocular view on, just to give you an idea, so this is the view through a pair of 10x50 binoculars, and the first number on a pair of binoculars is always the magnification. So in this case, 10 times magnification. And this is roughly the field of view that you would get. The Beehive Cluster is only 600 light years away. So it's one of the closest star clusters to us. It contains around 1,000 stars, and it covers the width of around 3 full moons in the sky. So it covers quite a large area. It can be visible to the unaided eye if you're in a dark location, but I think you will need binoculars to spot it this week, because it's quite low and the sun has only just set, so the conditions for observing it are not as favourable as they could be. The Beehive is an open cluster, and the stars are gravitationally bound to each other and were born out of a nebula or a star nursery. If you are observing the Beehive cluster through a pair of binoculars, then you could have a go at seeing if you can spot any colour in any of the stars. There's a mixture of stars in the cluster. There are a few yellowish, cool red giant stars and lots of younger bluey or white coloured stars. And astronomers have detected exoplanets orbiting some of the stars in the Beehive cluster, which is really interesting, and it's nice to, while you're observing, think about what the planets orbiting these stars might be like. Okay, let's take our binocular view off. So moving on through the week, and you'll see that the moon is waxing towards first quarter. So let's take us through Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. And as the week progresses, it's also going to get higher in the sky and it will be easier for you to observe it. You could try having a look along the moon's terminator line to see if you can spot any features on the surface, remembering that the terminator is the dividing line between the lit and the dark portions of the moon. If you were to travel to the moon and stand in the lit portion close to the terminator, the sun would appear low and you'd be casting a dramatic shadow behind you. And that same effect occurs with the physical features on the moon's surface, which is why observing those features when they are near the terminator gives you the best view. If you have a small telescope and the skies are clear on Sunday, you could have a go at observing the Apennine mountain range, which is quite near to the terminator. I'm just pointing it out with my mouse now. It's named after the mountains of the same name in Italy, and interestingly, mountains on the moon are not formed in the same way that mountains on the Earth are. The moon has got no tectonic plates, it doesn't have any volcanic action, so almost all of its mountains are actually the results of impacts by asteroids in the distant past. And the Apennines are the result of shock waves from the impact that created the Mare Imbrium, or the Sea of Rains. And you can see the Sea of Rains just here next to the Apennine Mountains. And interestingly, the Apollo 15 mission landed on the edge of the Sea of Rains, quite close to the mountains. Let's take a look at our constellation of the week now, which is Cygnus, the Swan. Here we go. So Cygnus the Swan, swimming through the river of the Milky Way. So spotting Cygnus is a good way to help you to find the Milky Way galaxy. If I put the constellation art on, there we go, you can see the swan. And in one version of the story of Cygnus, the swan represents Orpheus, musician to the gods, who we've talked about in a previous episode. And when he died, he was transformed into a swan and placed in the heavens next to his beloved harp, which is the constellation of Lyra. Cygnus is the home of Deneb, one of the 3 stars of the summer triangle asterism that we talked about last week. So here we go, here's Deneb. And Deneb also forms the head of another asterism called the Northern Cross. If I just take the art off. So the Northern Cross is this cross here. So most of the constellation of Cygnus, but without the extra bit on its wings. And the name Deneb actually comes from the Arabic for tail, as it forms the tail of the swan. And Deneb, we know, is very bright and very distant. It's over 1,000 light years away from us, making it one of the most distant stars we can see with the naked eye. And the reason we can see it at all when it's so far away is because it's such a powerful star. And if we were to place Deneb 25 light years away, so a similar distance away then to us that Vega is, then it would be so bright that we'd be able to see it in the daytime. It would outshine Venus, and it would cast shadows on the Earth. And that's because it's a blue-white supergiant, many times larger than the Sun, and it's burning through its fuel really quickly, and eventually will end in a supernova explosion. And while you're out having a look at Cygnus the Swan and having a look at Deneb, you might like to have a go at spotting the North America Nebula, so a second nebula for us to have a look at this week. And if you have exceptional viewing conditions, then it would be visible to the naked eye, but you'd need a moonless night and you'd need a dark sky without very much light pollution at all. So really you probably want to try it with a pair of binoculars. If I just zoom in to Deneb, you might be able to see the North America Nebula coming into view. There we go, it's just popped up. So this is the North America Nebula, and in binoculars it would appear as a fuzzy patch, and we know that stars are being born here in this nebula, but it's difficult to know exactly where star formation is taking place in a nebula like this, because there's lots and lots of dust which obscures our view. And infrared telescopes like the Spitzer space telescope that is in orbit are brilliant at penetrating through that dust to give astronomers a better idea of exactly what's happening within. So that brings me to the end of our What's in the Night Sky session for this week. I'll be back again next week with another episode.